So, we are now going to discuss the overview and the history of C Sharp. So, under this module, we have here the following learning objectives. First is to discuss the brief history of the C Sharp language. Then, we will also explain the program structure in C Sharp and the use of comments in a C Sharp program. And lastly, we will define what a C Sharp program is and discuss how do we create a program. So first is we have here a brief history of the C Sharp language. So C Sharp is a modern general purpose object-oriented programming language developed by Microsoft and approved by ECMA and ISO. So when we say general purpose object-oriented programming language, so C Sharp is an example of a high-level language which revolves around the concept of objects as the basic element of your program. So C Sharp was developed by Anders Hillsberg and his team during the development of .NET framework. So Anders Hillsberg is considered as the father or the developer of the C Sharp language since he was the one who introduced C Sharp language as, of course, a high level programming language. So the syntax of C Sharp is similar to a C++. So if you are familiar with the C++ language, then the program structure of your C++ is quite similar with that of your C Sharp. So C Sharp was also initially called as COOL for C-like object-oriented language, but it was renamed into C Sharp because it is a step above your C or your C++ language. So sharp means a semitone above in music, and it can also be viewed as a stacked four pluses. So we have C+++++. So C Sharp is also designed for common language infrastructure, or also known as your CLI, which consists of the executable code and runtime environment that allows use of various high-level languages to be used on different computer platforms and architectures. So we also have here the program structure of C Sharp. So in here, we have several key points to remember whenever we are going to write our program in C Sharp. So first is lowercase, which simply means that elements or components of a C Sharp program are usually written in lower cases. Then, aside from that, C Sharp program also is case sensitive, which simply means that uppercase letter is treated differently from that of your lowercase letters, which means that your C Sharp compiler will treat differently a component or an element which is written in uppercase letter or in lowercase letter. So say for example, if we used a variable x for instance that is an uppercase letter, it will be treated differently with that of your variable x which is written in lowercase letter. Then C Sharp program also needs curly brackets. So which simply means that these curly brackets are used to group the statements or the codes used in C Sharp. So these brackets used in your C Sharp program are usually used for grouping your classes, main method, as well as the namespace. The next is we also have C sharp love semicolons. So which simply means that all statements written in C sharp must always end with a semicolon. So whenever we write a statement, an expression or a line of code in C Sharp, there must always be a semicolon at the end of these statements, these expression, or these lines of codes. Then we also have here close curly brackets. So meaning to say that whenever we open an, a curly brace or a curly bracket in your program, we must always close it. Okay, and lastly, variable declaration in C Sharp follows this particular syntax here. So we have here the data type used for that variable, then the name of the variable. So when we say name of the variable, this is actually the identifier used in your program for that particular variable. And this is a user defined variable. And lastly, we also have here the default value or the initial value of the variable upon declaration, which is assigned using the equal sign operator. So in here, we use a data type which is named as string. So the data type in variable declaration is used to determine or to identify the kind or the type of data that you want to store in your variable. And then we have here also the name which is assigned to your variable, in which this name here serves as an identifier in your C sharp program. Then we have its initial value, which is C sharp, and enclosed with a double quotation since the variable was declared as string type. Therefore, all string type values must be enclosed with a double quotation. Then C Sharp also uses comments whenever we write our program. So what are comments in C Sharp? So comments are notes written for documentation purposes. And these comments in your C Sharp program does not affect the flow of execution of your program, which simply means that these comments are disregarded or are not compiled by your C sharp compiler. So meaning to say, these comments are being ignored by your C sharp compiler. So we have two types of comments in C sharp. So the first type of comment in C sharp is the single line comments. And usually, for us to write a single line comments in your C sharp program, we use the double slash. So all text that is after this double slash are treated as comment. Okay, and for us to determine a comment in your C sharp program, usually it has, of course, a color green, okay, in your program structure. Then, aside from the single line comment, is we also have the multi-line comments or the multiple line comments, in which multiple line comments are written using its delimiter slash asterisk, and of course it ends with the delimiter asterisk slash. So all text or statements written within or between this delimiter are considered as comments in C sharp and are being ignored by your C sharp compiler every time it executes your program. So what is a program? When we are talking of a C-sharp program, it is simply a text file containing a sequence of C-sharp commands put together according to the laws of C-sharp grammar. So when we say text file containing a sequence of C-sharp commands, so when we talk of C-sharp commands, we are actually talking about codes that are executable here. So meaning to say that this text file that we create contains several lines of codes that can be executed by your C sharp compiler. And these codes or block of codes written in this text file follows the laws of the C sharp grammar. So when we say laws of C sharp grammar, we are talking about the rule that is used in writing your C sharp program, because each of the programming languages that we use has its own rule of law. So when we say rule of law, it has its own structure, it has its own syntax that needs to be followed for it to execute and compile the program correctly. So, this text file is known also as the source file, probably because it's the source of all the frustration. So a C# source file carries the extension .cs, just as a Microsoft Word file, for instance, which is, of course, uses the file extension .docs or .docs, or an MS-DOS command with, of course, a batch file that ends with the .bat. So the concept extension cs is just a convention. So all source file in C# that is being created ends or uses the file extension .cs. So just like other programming languages that is written in a text editor, so this file that we create in C# are saved using the .cs file extension. So how do I program in C sharp? So how do we write or create our program in C sharp? So for us to write a program, you need two specialized computer programs. One is an editor, which you need or you use to write your code as you build your CS source file. So meaning to say that whenever we are going to write our program, we need a text editor or simply a an application that can be used for us to write our C# codes. Then we also need a compiler because this compiler will convert your source file into a machine executable file, which simply means that all source code written using your text editor must be translated or must be converted into a machine readable code since your computer understand only machine language. Therefore, whatever code we write in C sharp, that must be converted into a machine code or into a machine language so that your computer will be able to understand it. So, this convertible file is now being executed by your C sharp compiler. So next is algorithm. So when we are talking of an algorithm, it is a sequence of precise instructions which led to a solution. So some approximately equivalent words are recipe, method, directions, procedure, and routine. So again, when we are talking of an algorithm, as mentioned here, it is a sequence of precise instructions which led to a solution. So when we say precise instruction, algorithm provides a step-by-step procedure or a guide on how to solve a particular problem. So just like for instance, a real life algorithm that we use, which is the recipe. So the recipe provides different steps or different procedures on how to cook a certain menu. So just like in solving a particular problem in programming, we need also to provide an algorithm for us to be able to design the solution for this problem.